Does Facebook still defend the concept that it doesn't have to be truthful to be on your platform?
I understand where you're getting at. I do think that if you'll permit me, the way I would like to maybe talk about it a bit.
Yes or no would work. Yes or no would work.
That's why we're here. We would welcome basic safe.
So this is a learning experience for you?
To welcome basics, Mr. Kent. Basic safe.
I ask that with respect and civility.
We would welcome basic standards that lawmakers can impose on the platform about what should go up and what should come down.
The world's largest tech firms were on the defensive today in Ottawa. Canada hosted a committee of politicians from nearly a dozen countries, which got the chance to grill representatives from Facebook, Google, and Twitter about how they manage data, how they handle the spread of misinformation, and whether they're a potential threat to democracy. The committee also heard from observers of the industry who are worried about what they're seeing, like this former Facebook advisor who says, shut them all down.
At the end of the day, though, the most effective path to reform would be to shut down the platforms, at least temporarily, as Sri Lanka did. Any country can go first. The platforms have left you no choice. The time has come to call their bluff. Companies with responsible business models will emerge overnight to fill the void.
So is that an extreme recommendation or perhaps a necessary move until governments learn how to govern social media giants? Jim Balsillie is a former co-CEO of Research in Motion, which created the BlackBerry. He's now the chair of the Council of Canadian Innovators, and he testified today before the International Grand Committee on Big Data, Privacy and Democracy. Hi, Mr. Balsillie. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be with you, Vashi.
Let me start off I know that you gave a lengthy submission to the testimony. To the committee. I want to ask you about that in a second. But on that proposal put forward to just shut them all down, what do you think?
Well, what Roger was saying, you put it in context, he's saying basically you have to establish leverage before they'll take you seriously. And currently all they're doing is patronizing and obfuscating. So if there's a crisis, you shut them down, or you establish the threat, the legitimate threat that you'll do it, so that they'll start taking regulators and legislators seriously. And judging by the fact that they didn't show up, they're not taking any of this seriously.
What do you think about them not showing up?
Well, it's disregard for the legitimacy of democracy and those that regulate for the public good.
And what does that say to you?
It says they got to show that they mean it.
Your presentation, you said a lot of interesting things. One thing that jumped out at me was that data isn't the new oil, but the new plutonium. What does that mean?
It means that it can be harnessed for good, like generating energy, but it can also be, if not managed properly, it can also be weaponized, which we're seeing because data, the objective of the data-driven economy is to undermine personal autonomy. And if you're not careful with it, the waste product can even create all kinds of trouble. So the metaphor of plutonium, I think, is a very good one because what's happening absent proper management, which we certainly do not have currently, are guardrails, this data-driven economy is being used against us, where they're appropriating public good for narrow and specific private gain. And the job of regulators and governments is to put guardrails on so that capitalism generates public good as well as private gain at the same time.
I want to ask you about what you think those guardrails should be in a second. But when you lay out the problem, like for people watching, I think a lot of the time we're talking about this in sort of words that are hard to understand how it affects my life. Like if you were to describe what you think the problem is that needs to be solved, how would you describe it?
Sure. I mean, it's very simple. The objective of the data-driven economy and the nature of the technology and the algorithms is to undermine personal autonomy and private will. And then what they do is they use that to get you hooked and change your behavior that they sell to the highest bidder. And that is an appropriation of public good for private gain. So it's not the technology that's the problem, it's the business model that's the problem.
So what does that then mean for the kinds of solutions that should be adopted by governments, let's say?
It means that you have to attenuate or ban aspects of the business model that hurt the public good. But that's not a criticism of the technology, that's a criticism of the business model. A car is not a bad thing, but a car going 200 kilometers an hour with a drunk driver in front of a school at 9 o'clock in the morning is a bad thing. So you govern the application of a technology, but that doesn't mean the technology is a bad thing. And right now, the application of this technology is not being governed, and it's being applied by companies that have demonstrated a disinterest in public good.
So what does that mean for what the Canadian government, for example, specifically should do? And if you were to assess what they have done so far, how would you grade it?
Well, I can't grade it because they haven't done anything.
So an F.
Well, it's not an F. It's a
There's nothing to grade.
It's a did not attend.
And what does that say?
We need to attend because this is the most potent force in our society today. And the nature of digital is it cross-cuts. It cross-cuts security, it cross-cuts economy, it cross-cuts social good, and it cross-cuts international economic and geopolitical issues. So it is the most potent force at play right now, and it's cross-cutting. And the most potent aspect of it is that the job of the data-driven economy's current business model is to undermine personal autonomy. Yet the bulwark of democracy is the sovereign, autonomous individual self expressed freely. So these are fundamentally incompatible forces, and that's why they say the data economy-driven economy is a threat to democracy, and we saw that in full flight in Brexit and I would say in the Trump election.
What do you think we're going to see in the federal election?
Well, it's 100% we're going to have election interference because by definition, our political parties are using these forces to undermine personal autonomy for specific political party gain. So we have fundamentally undermined election integrity in the structure of our system. I'm not aware in the Western economy of another democracy that doesn't have political parties under privacy legislation, and yet—
Do you think that's the big thing missing right now?
Well, that's the fox being in charge of the hen house. Mm-hmm. You have the main protagonists using a tool that is designed to undermine the very foundation of election integrity, which is a sovereign, autonomous, independent self. And it's impossible to have an integrity election when you're using these tools, and it's even worse when you're using them without even being governed by privacy legislation. And so I would say that is number one, the most important thing to do is bring the political parties into our privacy legislation.
That's something the Privacy Commissioner has asked for, I think, as long as I've been doing this show, so over a year, because I remember interviewing him very soon after starting. And we've asked a number of ministers, especially Karina Gold, who heads up that file, and I think it was Scott Bryson at one time as well, who was looking at it. They were all open to the idea, but they said it deserved further study and needed further study.
What's the study? You either say you're under privacy legislation or you're not. And in the current draft white paper for the privacy legislation upgrades, there's nothing about political parties in it. There's nothing.
And without that, can the problem be fully tackled?
No, not at all. It's the most bedrock aspect of the problem. We're not even addressing the most. Now, don't get me wrong, there's many other things to do with it. I mean, for instance, if personally targeted ads are designed to undermine personal autonomy, why should we allow them during elections when it is about personal autonomy? We ban a number of things during elections that you're not allowed to do. We have election legislation. There's a whole bunch of things you're not supposed to do. I think if you took the 5 most important things you're not allowed to do, in aggregate, they don't add up to the undermining that this one carve-out they've given, which is online personalized political ads that are not transparent. So in Canada, we have 30 million non-transparent or 20 million private campaigns going on that are about undermining autonomy, not bringing people together in a collective, transparent fashion where we either collectively agree or agree to disagree, as you do on this show.
That's very true. Good point. There is also part of, the focus of the conversation at the committee, obviously, and on this show is often what can the government do, or should the government do?
Lots.
Is there a role? But what about the companies? Because they're also on the hot seat, essentially, in this committee as well. Do you think that, they are saying very earnestly that they want to do more, that they're doing more, that they have measures in place. Not everybody believes them, obviously. What do you think?
That's hokum. And they send junior local GR reps to do the speaking of their companies for legislators that represent something today, I think, about 500 million population. And they have no intention of doing anything. They're just using obfuscation and delaying tactics and dividing and conquering and manipulation and Orwellian words while they rocket to ever greater profits but it's what cigarette companies would do, or what car companies did when they said they couldn't do the California legislation. They said, if you do that, we'll go bankrupt. What did we get? Better cars, better environment, and record car company profits. So I believe in innovation. I believe in capitalism. You just have to put guardrails so that you harness it for both private gain and public good concurrently, not one appropriating from the other.
Do you think that there has been a shift? Do you think that we're headed in that direction at least? Like the pressure is, I know you're saying that the action has yet to be taken, that there hasn't been any action, but is the pressure so great now that there inevitably will be?
Oh, I think there's an awakening and activity. I think Canada's a global outlier in action. I would say of all the countries, Western, that I've visited, I'd say Canada has been the greatest level of inaction in terms of addressing this, and I think we have an opportunity to act, and I think we have an urgency to act, and it is about the public good, and we elect politicians to advance public good, so it is their job, and this is not a partisan comment. I just want a better country.
All right, I'll leave it there. Nice point to end on. Thank you, Mr. Balsillie. Pleasure to have you on.
Pleasure to be with you today.
That's Jim Balsillie, Chair of the Council of Canadian Innovators. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.